The German commander marched into the prison yard with his medals polished and ordered every captured man to stand for Berlin. But before the guards could force the line straight, an American truck crashed through the outer gate carrying a torn German flag, a bleeding radio clerk, and a newspaper wrapped in oilcloth. The commander laughed at the headline, called it enemy theater, and raised his pistol toward the clerk before anyone could read the final line. Colonel Victor Heller still believed Berlin was holding when the American convoy reached the camp that morning. He had spent the night walking between the barracks, ordering prisoners to prepare for a final German counterattack, and by sunrise he had forced every captured officer into the yard to hear his announcement. The camp was already under American control outside the wire, but Heller still commanded the inner prisoner compound through fear, loyal guards, and a radio room he claimed was receiving direct orders from Germany. The first sign that something was wrong came from the road beyond the gate. A supply truck that should have arrived slowly came in too fast, with its side panel cracked and its driver shouting for the gate to open. American MPs blocked the road, but the truck swerved into the outer barrier, stopped hard in the mud, and spilled a young German radio clerk out of the passenger side with a leather message case tied to his wrist. Heller reacted before the Americans did. He pushed through the prisoner line, ordered two loyal men to seize the clerk, and shouted that the message case belonged to him. The clerk crawled backward, clutching the case, while an American lieutenant stepped between them and demanded that no one touch the courier until the compound was secured. Heller ignored him and declared that the clerk had deserted a command post still loyal to Berlin. The case opened during the struggle. A folded newspaper slid across the mud, and the headline was visible before the wind caught it. Berlin had fallen. The words moved through the yard like a thrown match. Some prisoners stared at it, others stepped forward, and Heller's loyal men began shouting over them, insisting the paper was a forgery meant to break German discipline. Heller snatched the newspaper and tore it in half before the interpreter could read the article aloud. He then raised his pistol toward the radio clerk and accused him of carrying enemy lies into a camp that still answered to the German capital. The American lieutenant ordered him to lower the weapon, but Heller did not obey. He told the prisoners that any man repeating the headline would be treated as a traitor before sundown. The lieutenant sent a runner to bring the senior American commander from the main road, then ordered the MPs to secure the radio room first. Heller understood the danger and moved faster than anyone expected. He sent 3 loyal prisoners toward the communications hut, then ordered the yard leaders to lock the barrack doors from outside, trapping the undecided men inside the open space where his voice could still reach them. The radio clerk finally spoke through the interpreter. He said the last real message from Berlin had ended days earlier, and every order Heller had claimed since then had come from a local transmitter hidden inside the camp. Heller lunged at him, but an MP caught his arm and forced him back. The accusation changed the conflict immediately, because the question was no longer whether Berlin had fallen, but who had been lying to the camp after it did. American soldiers reached the communications hut moments too late. Smoke was already slipping from the window, and the door had been barred from inside. Heller smiled as if the burning room would protect him, but the radio clerk lifted his shaking hand toward the chapel tower and whispered that the real transmitter was not in the hut. It was above the yard, hidden where every prisoner had been forced to salute beneath it. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. The chapel tower became the center of the camp before the smoke from the communications hut had cleared. American MPs ran toward the steps while Heller shouted that no foreign soldier could enter a religious building without his authority, and his loyal prisoners locked arms across the doorway to slow them. The delay lasted only seconds, because the radio clerk pointed to the bell rope and said the transmitter wire had been pulled through the wall behind it. An American engineer climbed the narrow stairs first and found the bell room stripped of old storage crates. Behind a canvas sheet sat a compact radio set, 2 batteries, and a stack of message drafts written in Heller's hand. The latest draft ordered all prisoners to prepare for evacuation eastward before night, even though no German army remained close enough to receive them. The engineer carried the pages down into the yard, and the lie became something people could hold. Heller changed tactics at once. He claimed the transmitter had been placed there by American agents to humiliate him, then ordered the prisoner officers to reject any document not stamped by a German high command seal. One elderly German major stepped forward and asked to see the seal on Heller's latest order. Heller struck the man across the face with his glove, and the loyal line surged forward to protect him. The American MPs formed a barrier before the yard could break into a fight. The insult to the old major did more damage to Heller than the newspaper had, because ordinary prisoners who had feared the headline now saw their commander attacking one of their own officers to protect a lie. Several men began calling for the radio drafts to be read aloud. Heller ordered them silent, but his voice no longer landed with the same force. The escalation moved into the barracks when the radio clerk revealed that Heller had prepared evacuation lists for men he considered unreliable. The first list was hidden in the infirmary register. American medics entered the infirmary under guard and found 20 names marked with black dots, including the radio clerk, the old major, and 2 interpreters who had listened to foreign broadcasts through hidden headphones. Heller claimed the dots marked men needing medical attention, but the doctor found no treatment notes beside their names. Instead, he found travel tags already tied to a bundle of coats near the back door. The tags were numbered for transport before dusk. The men on the list were not being prepared for care. They were being prepared to disappear from the main count. A second discovery followed near the kitchen. MPs opened a flour bin after a prisoner cook pointed to fresh scratches on the lid. Inside, they found maps of forest routes, civilian coats, and forged passes written for work detachments that had never existed. Heller's plan had not been to wait for Berlin. It had been to march selected witnesses out under the cover of a false evacuation and leave the rest of the camp believing a rescue force was coming. The escalation ended when an American patrol stopped 2 loyal prisoners trying to move the old German major toward a rear gate. The major was not struggling because one of the men had pressed a knife handle against his ribs under a folded blanket. The MPs seized the men, opened the rear gate, and found wagon tracks leading toward the woods. Heller's false Berlin had now become a real escape route. The wagon tracks led American scouts through a wet field and into a line of pines behind the camp, where fresh boot marks circled an abandoned hunting lodge. Inside the lodge, they found a table set with bread, medical tins, and 4 German uniforms without prisoner markings. A map on the wall showed 3 roads away from the camp, and one route was marked with the same black dots found in the infirmary register. The discovery forced the first major consequence. Heller had been using the rumor of Berlin's survival to build a private evacuation channel for his loyal men and to remove anyone who could expose the fake broadcasts. The scouts returned with the map, and when it was spread across the hood of an American Jeep, the old major identified the route as a pre-war forestry road that bypassed the main checkpoints. Heller was placed under close guard near the administration hut, but his influence continued moving through the camp. A group of loyal prisoners began chanting that Berlin still stood, trying to drown out the interpreter reading the captured radio drafts. The chanting drew nervous men from the barrack doors, and for a moment the yard divided into 2 crowds, one around the evidence, one around the lie Heller had built. The radio clerk changed the crowd by asking for the transmitter microphone. The Americans hesitated, then allowed him to connect the set under supervision. He tuned the receiver to a foreign broadcast, held the speaker near the open window, and the yard heard reports from multiple Allied stations describing the fall of Berlin and the collapse of Central Command. The voices were not dramatic, but they were clear, repeated, and impossible for Heller to tear apart with his hands. Heller reacted by attacking the clerk's credibility. He shouted that the young man had been captured, bribed, and returned to the camp as a puppet. The clerk answered by producing the last coded message he had personally received before the signal died. It contained an unfinished evacuation phrase and a broken authentication mark. The final message from Germany had not commanded resistance. It had ended in confusion. The consequence reached the prisoners' families next. In the administration hut, Americans found outgoing letters Heller had censored and held back for weeks. Several letters begged relatives not to believe rumors of surrender because Heller had promised the war would turn again. Others had been rewritten by camp clerks under pressure. The prisoners saw that Heller had not only lied about Berlin, he had tried to control what they told the world outside the wire. A medical emergency then pushed the conflict into action. One of the men marked with a black dot collapsed near the water pump after being denied medicine during the morning chaos. The doctor found his ration card removed from the infirmary board and his medicine placed in a locked cabinet marked for evacuation supplies. Heller's system had been punishing doubters before the truth reached them. The American commander ordered the evacuation route sealed, the hunting lodge guarded, and every black dot prisoner moved into a protected barrack. Heller watched the names leave his reach one by one. His false Berlin had cost men medicine, letters, safety, and identity inside the camp. And now every prisoner could see that the consequence of believing him had been more dangerous than the headline he destroyed. The major reversal came just after midnight, when the old German major asked to speak privately and then revealed that Heller did no part of the truth. He had received confirmation that Berlin was collapsing days earlier, but he had hidden it because he feared losing control before he could move a sealed box out of the camp. The box was not in the radio room, the infirmary, or the lodge. It was buried beneath the flag platform in the center of the yard. The Americans ordered a work light brought to the platform while prisoners watched from behind guard ropes. Heller broke his calm for the first time and shouted that the platform was a memorial and could not be touched. The old major answered that Heller had rebuilt it 2 nights earlier with loyal men only. The engineers lifted the boards, dug through the packed soil, and struck metal less than 2 feet down. The sealed box was carried to a table and opened under witness. Inside were foreign currency, identity papers, a pistol wrapped in cloth, and a folder of names divided into 3 groups: loyal, useful, and disposable. The black dot prisoners were listed in the final group. Heller had not been a deluded commander trapped in old news. He had been preparing a controlled collapse, using the myth of Berlin to decide who would be protected and who would be abandoned. The reversal turned the camp against him faster than the broadcasts had. Men who had defended him earlier now looked at the lists for their own names. One prisoner found his brother under disposable and lunged toward the table, but American MPs held him back while the old major pointed to another page. It showed the scheduled time for a night movement through the forestry road, only 40 minutes away. The American commander ordered an immediate raid on the hunting lodge route. Trucks rolled out with lights covered, and Heller was placed in the lead vehicle under guard so he could identify any challenge signals. He refused to speak during the drive, but when the convoy reached the pines, a lantern flashed twice from the lodge window. Someone outside the camp was still waiting for him. The raid captured 2 former camp guards and a civilian driver beside a wagon loaded with blankets, fuel, and sealed food tins. They carried a second box of papers matching Heller's handwriting, including an order to leave several marked prisoners behind as unreliable losses if pursuit began. The reversal was complete. Heller's ignorance had been a performance, and his final plan had already been in motion while he mocked the newspaper. When Heller was brought back to the yard, the prisoners were no longer arguing about Berlin. They were looking at the names. The old question had died, and a harder one had replaced it. How many men had nearly been abandoned by a commander pretending to defend them? Heller tried to claim the lists were emergency categories, but the word disposable had already done its damage. Before dawn, the old major stepped in front of the prisoner officers and removed the command badge from his own coat. He placed it on the evidence table and said through the interpreter that no German prisoner officer would obey Heller again. That public break was the reversal Heller could not survive, because the authority he had built on a fallen city finally fell inside the yard itself. The final irreversible event began with a complete roll call under American control. Every prisoner passed through 3 stations, one for name, one for Barack, and one for status on Heller's lists. The process was slow but constant, and with every checked name, Heller's private categories were crossed out in red pencil. Loyal, useful, disposable. All of them were replaced by one word the Americans wrote again and again: living. Heller was forced to stand beside the table while the men he had marked passed him in line. The old major walked first, then the radio clerk, then the sick man from the water pump, then the interpreters who had nearly been removed before night. No one was allowed to strike Heller, and no one was allowed to shout in his face. The punishment was procedural, public, and impossible to undo. The final danger came from the loyal faction near the cookhouse. 3 men tried to break away during the roll call and reached the evidence table, where the sealed box, route maps, and disposable list were still displayed. They did not get close. Ordinary prisoners blocked them before the MPs arrived, and the brief struggle ended with the loyal men pinned against the wall by their own countrymen. The camp had chosen the roll call over the lie. The American commander ordered the loyal faction separated and the evidence copied in front of witnesses. A clerk made duplicate lists. The radio clerk signed the broadcast transcript, and the old major signed the statement about the buried box. Heller's story could no longer depend on one newspaper, one witness, or one captured route. It now existed in names, signatures, maps, and objects recovered from places he had controlled. Then the final act began. The torn newspaper was repaired with tape and pinned to the center board, but it was not placed alone. Around it, the Americans pinned the transmitter drafts, the black dot register, the buried list, the forestry map, and the forged passes. The headline about Berlin became only the first piece of a larger truth. Heller had tried to deny the fall of a city, but he had exposed the fall of his own command. Heller was ordered to remove his officer belt, side cap, and command armband before the assembled prisoners. Each item was placed into an evidence bag, labeled and sealed. The gesture was not theatrical revenge. It was the formal end of his authority inside the camp. Once the seals closed, there was no office, platform, radio room, or loyal guard left for him to return to. The radio clerk then read a final verified announcement through the camp loudspeaker. Berlin had fallen, German command had collapsed, and all prisoner administration inside the compound would now be handled directly by the Americans. The words moved across the yard without Heller's voice interrupting them. Men who had spent days trapped inside his version of the war heard the outside world finally enter the camp. At sunrise, Heller was escorted through the gate past the repaired newspaper and the crossed-out lists. He did not look at the radio clerk, the old major, or the men he had marked disposable. The irreversible event was not that he learned Berlin had fallen. It was that every prisoner learned he had used that ignorance as a weapon, and once the camp saw the evidence in daylight, no order from him could ever stand again. The yard changed after Heller left. The flag platform was left open for one more hour, so every prisoner could see the empty hole where the box had been buried. The radio clerk placed the broken transmitter key beside the repaired newspaper, and the old major watched the black dot names copied into a protected register. By noon, the camp no longer waited for Berlin, and the men Heller had marked for disappearance stood in line for food under their real names. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WW2 stories.